I still remember the first time I stood beneath the burning Egyptian sun and looked across the endless desert. The wind carried grains of sand across the ancient stones, whispering through ruins that had survived thousands of years. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of kings, pharaohs, warriors, builders of monuments so vast they seemed impossible. Yet that wasn't what captured my attention. What gripped me was a question. What happened to the women whose stories were nearly erased? The deeper I dug into the history of ancient Egypt, the more I discovered something strange. Hidden behind the colossal statues and towering pyramids was a trail of powerful queens. Some ruled empires, some commanded armies, some challenged traditions that had stood for centuries, and yet many of their names were barely remembered. It felt as if history itself was hiding something. The mystery began with fragments, a damaged carving here, a broken inscription there, a face carefully chiseled from a monument. At first, I assumed time had simply worn these records away. Then, I learned a disturbing truth. In some cases, the damage wasn't accidental. Someone had wanted these women forgotten. That realization sent me down a path I never expected. As I explored ancient records, one name appeared again and again like a shadow moving through history. Not always clearly, not always completely, but enough to make me curious. Who were these queens? And why did so many of their stories end in mystery? The civilization of ancient Egypt lasted for more than 3,000 years. Dynasties rose and collapsed, kingdoms flourished and fell into chaos. During those centuries, power was almost always expected to pass through male rulers. But expectations and reality are rarely the same thing. Again and again, remarkable women emerged from the shadows. Some inherited influence through royal blood. Others seized opportunities during moments of crisis. A few climbed so high that they stood at the very center of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Yet every answer seemed to raise another question. One queen appeared in official records, then vanished without explanation. Another was praised during her lifetime but condemned after her death. A third became so powerful that later rulers appeared determined to erase every trace of her existence. Why? What were they afraid of? As I searched for clues, I found myself drawn back thousands of years to a world unlike anything we know today. The Nile River was the lifeblood of Egypt. Its waters transformed harsh desert into fertile land. Villages lined its banks. Farmers depended on its floods. Priests watched the heavens, believing the fate of the kingdom was intertwined with the gods. And above all stood the royal court. It was a place of unimaginable wealth and dangerous ambition. Behind palace walls, alliances were formed. Secrets were traded. Rivals watched each other carefully. Every smile could conceal a threat. Every celebration could hide a conspiracy. This was the world in which Egypt's queens lived, and surviving it was never guaranteed. The further I traveled through the historical record, the more I realized these women were not passive figures standing beside powerful men. Many were political strategists, diplomats, religious leaders. Some may have been far more influential than the official histories admitted. One queen, in particular, seemed to stand at the beginning of the mystery. Her name surfaced in scattered inscriptions dating back nearly 5,000 years. Archaeologists still debate details of her life. The evidence is incomplete. Time has swallowed much of her story. But what remains is fascinating. She may have been among the earliest female rulers in recorded history. Imagine that for a moment. Thousands of years before most civilizations would even consider the possibility a woman may have sat upon Egypt's throne. Yet the evidence is frustratingly elusive. Each clue feels like a piece of a puzzle missing half its pieces. I found myself staring at photographs of ancient artifacts, searching for answers hidden in symbols carved before the rise of Rome, before Greece reached its height, before many civilizations even existed. The mystery only deepened, because the more examples I uncovered, the more impossible it became to dismiss them as exceptions. These queens were not accidents. They were part of Egypt's story, and still, many of their names were fading into silence. One evening, while studying records connected to a queen whose influence seemed astonishing for her time, I noticed something peculiar. Certain monuments had been altered, names removed, images damaged. The pattern was too deliberate to ignore. Someone had worked hard to rewrite the past. At that moment, I realized I wasn't simply investigating ancient royalty. I was following the trail of one of history's greatest cover-ups, and the next queen I encountered would reveal just how far people were willing to go to erase a woman who dared to rule like a king. The more I investigated, the more unsettling the pattern became. At first, I thought the damaged monuments were isolated incidents. Ancient structures suffer from weather, wars, and the simple passage of time. But the evidence in front of me told a different story. This was deliberate. Entire sections of inscriptions had been carefully removed. Faces had been chipped away with astonishing precision. Names that once appeared proudly on temple walls had vanished, leaving behind only scars in the stone. I couldn't stop asking myself the same question. What kind of ruler inspires people to erase them centuries later? The answer seemed to lead me toward one extraordinary woman. Her name was Hatshepsut. At least that was the name that survived. For years, I had heard her described as one of Egypt's most successful rulers. Yet as I dug deeper, I found something almost unbelievable. Despite overseeing an era of prosperity, stability, and ambitious construction projects, large parts of her legacy had been systematically attacked after her death. Why erase success? Why destroy the memory of a ruler who appeared to strengthen the kingdom? The contradiction fascinated me. I imagined the world she inherited. The royal court was a place where power shifted constantly. Every decision carried risks. Every alliance could become a threat overnight. When circumstances placed her close to the throne, tradition stood in her way. Egypt expected kings, not queens. At first, she governed in a role that seemed temporary, but over time, something remarkable happened. She stepped beyond the boundaries society had set for her. The evidence suggests she adopted many of the symbols traditionally reserved for male pharaohs. Statues portrayed her wearing royal regalia. Official imagery presented her with the authority of a king. The move was bold, possibly dangerous, and I couldn't help wondering what conversations took place behind palace walls. How many people opposed her? How many secretly supported her? How many waited for her to fail? The answers remain hidden, but one thing is clear. She succeeded. Trade flourished. Monumental projects rose from the earth. The kingdom remained stable. By many measures, her reign was remarkably effective. Yet the mystery wasn't what happened during her rule. The mystery was what happened afterward. Years after her death, efforts were made to remove her image from history. As I studied photographs of damaged statues, I felt an odd sense of frustration. Across thousands of years, I could still see traces of the attack. It was as if someone had reached through time itself and tried to silence her. But Hatshepsut was only one piece of the puzzle. The deeper I went, the stranger the story became. Another queen emerged from the shadows. Another woman whose influence appeared immense. Another life surrounded by unanswered questions. This time the trail led me to one of the most famous faces in history. Or perhaps I should say one of the most famous missing faces. Because despite worldwide recognition, much of what people think they know about her remains uncertain. Nefertiti. Even today, the name carries an almost mythical quality. The surviving bust discovered in modern times is breathtaking. The features are elegant, the expression is calm, the craftsmanship is extraordinary. Yet beauty is not what drew me in. It was the mystery. Nefertiti appeared beside one of Egypt's most controversial rulers during a period of dramatic change. Religious traditions that had existed for generations were challenged. New beliefs rose to prominence. Powerful institutions faced disruption. The entire kingdom seemed to be shifting beneath its own foundations, and Nefertiti stood at the center of it. The more records I examined, the more prominent she appeared. Her images were unusually powerful. Her role seemed unusually significant. In some depictions, she appeared participating in acts of authority rarely associated with queens of the time. Then something strange happened. The records grew quiet, very quiet. Her name became difficult to trace. References became scarce. And suddenly, historians were left with one enormous question. What happened to her? Did she die unexpectedly? Did she assume a new identity? Did she briefly rule? Or did political forces erase her story? No one knows for certain, and that uncertainty has fueled generations of speculation. I found myself staring at timelines, inscriptions, and archaeological reports late into the night, trying to follow her trail. Every lead seemed promising. Every lead eventually disappeared into darkness. It felt like chasing a shadow through history. And then there was another mystery, one that carried a different kind of tension, a queen whose story unfolded during periods of instability, succession disputes, and dangerous transitions of power. Again and again, I encountered references to women who held influence during moments when Egypt itself seemed vulnerable. That wasn't a coincidence. When kingdoms face uncertainty, extraordinary figures often emerge. But uncertainty also creates enemies. The more power these queens acquired, the more resistance they seemed to attract. I began noticing a recurring pattern. A woman rises. She gains authority. She reshapes events. Then history becomes fragmented. Names disappear. Records conflict. Evidence vanishes. It happened too often to ignore. By now, I wasn't simply studying ancient rulers. I was investigating a recurring struggle over memory itself. Who gets remembered? Who gets forgotten? And who decides? Those questions became even more urgent when I encountered accounts describing periods of political chaos. Dynasties changed. Rival factions competed for influence. Religious conflicts simmered beneath the surface. In such an environment, preserving a queen's legacy may have been far from everyone's priority. In fact, destroying it may have served powerful interests. The possibility lingered in my mind, and then I came across a detail that sent a chill through me. Archaeologists had uncovered clues suggesting that some royal burials might not be what they seem. Tombs, hidden chambers, missing remains, unidentified mummies. Suddenly, the mystery wasn't only about erased names, it was about missing people. The thought was impossible to ignore. What if some of Egypt's most powerful queens had vanished so completely that even their final resting places remained unknown? What if their greatest secrets were still buried beneath the desert sands? The idea felt almost unbelievable. Yet the evidence kept pulling me forward. Every discovery seemed to point towards something larger, something hidden. And as I followed those clues deeper into the darkness of Egypt's past, I could feel the story approaching its most dangerous point. Because the queens I had been studying were no longer merely historical figures. They were becoming victims of one of history's greatest disappearances. And I was about to reach the moment where the trail nearly vanished forever. The trail grew colder with every step. What had begun as a search for forgotten queens was turning into something far more unsettling. I had expected missing records. I had expected damaged monuments. Ancient history is full of gaps, but I hadn't expected entire lives to seem as though they had been swallowed by the desert itself. Night after night, I sat surrounded by photographs of inscriptions, excavation reports, and maps of ancient burial sites. The deeper I looked, the more the evidence seemed to dissolve. Every answer created two new questions. Every discovery revealed another mystery. And eventually, I reached the point where even the experts disagreed. One theory would emerge, then another would contradict it. Then a new discovery would challenge both. It felt like standing in the middle of a sandstorm, trying to see a distant landmark through shifting clouds of dust. Nothing stayed clear for long. The mystery of Nefertiti haunted me the most. For centuries, people had searched for definitive answers about her fate. Yet certainty remained frustratingly out of reach. I found myself imagining the final years of her life, a kingdom under pressure, political tensions simmering beneath the surface, religious upheaval dividing powerful groups, a royal court filled with ambitions, loyalties, and rivalries. Then, suddenly, the historical record seemed to flicker. One moment, her presence felt undeniable. The next, it was as though she had stepped into darkness. No clear ending, no final chapter, just silence. The silence was almost more disturbing than any answer could have been, because silence allows endless possibilities. Had she fallen from power? Had she died unexpectedly? Had she survived under another name? Had someone deliberately erased her story? The questions lingered in my mind long after I stopped reading each night, and Nefertiti was not alone. Again and again, I encountered women whose stories ended in uncertainty, women who stood close to the center of power, only to vanish into the shadows of history. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Some of the strongest women in ancient Egypt appeared to leave behind the weakest traces. That contradiction troubled me. The more influential they became, the less visible their endings seemed to be. How could that happen? As I continued investigating, another chilling possibility emerged. Perhaps the mystery wasn't simply the result of lost records. Perhaps it was the result of intentional destruction. The idea felt increasingly plausible. Ancient rulers understood the power of memory. A monument was not merely stone. It was a message, a declaration, a claim to immortality. To remove a name from history was to attack more than a reputation. It was an attempt to erase existence itself. And suddenly, the damaged statues I had seen earlier took on a darker meaning. I could picture workers climbing scaffolds centuries ago, tools striking stone, faces disappearing piece by piece, names being carved away, not because they had been forgotten, because someone wanted them forgotten. The thought stayed with me. And then the mystery led me underground, into tombs, into burial chambers, into places where secrets had remained hidden for thousands of years. Whenever archaeologists uncover a royal tomb, there is always a sense of anticipation. The air itself seems charged. Every sealed doorway raises expectations. Every hidden chamber offers the possibility of discovery. But what fascinated me most were the tombs that remained unfinished. The tombs that appeared altered, the tombs that raised more questions than answers. Some royal burial sites seemed strangely incomplete. Others appeared to contain clues pointing toward people who were never officially identified. There were whispers of hidden rooms, speculation about undiscovered chambers, possibilities that refused to disappear, and every possibility seemed connected to the same question. Where were Egypt's missing queens? At times, the search felt almost overwhelming. Thousands of years separated me from the people I was studying. Empires had risen and fallen since their deaths. Languages had changed, cities had vanished, entire civilizations had disappeared. Yet somehow, fragments of their stories still survived, just enough to keep the mystery alive. One evening, while examining images from excavations in the Valley of the Kings, I found myself staring at a narrow passageway cut into the rock. The chamber was silent, empty, ancient, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it represented something larger. How many secrets were still hidden beyond walls that had never been opened? How many answers remained buried beneath layers of stone and sand? The uncertainty was maddening, but it was also strangely compelling, because every missing piece suggested that history's most important discoveries might still be waiting. Then came the moment that felt closest to the edge of the abyss, the point where the mystery nearly disappeared altogether. I encountered cases where the evidence became so fragmented that reconstructing events felt almost impossible. Names appeared briefly, then vanished. Relationships became uncertain. Dates conflicted. Entire sections of history seemed to collapse into speculation. For a moment, it felt as though the queens themselves were slipping away, not just from ancient records, but from memory. The realization hit me harder than I expected. These women had shaped one of the greatest civilizations on Earth. They had influenced politics, religion, diplomacy, and royal succession. Yet thousands of years later, many of them existed only as fragments, broken statues, partial inscriptions, damaged tombs, scattered clues. It was a form of isolation unlike anything I had ever imagined. To stand at the center of power during life, and then risk disappearing from history after death. That thought lingered with me as I continued searching for answers. And then, just when it seemed the mystery might remain unsolved forever, new discoveries began to emerge. New technologies, fresh excavations, hidden evidence that earlier generations could never have examined. For the first time, I sensed something changing. The trail wasn't ending, it was beginning again. Questions that had remained unanswered for centuries were returning to the surface. Possibilities once dismissed were being reconsidered, and buried beneath the weight of time, I could finally see the faint outline of hope. Not certainty, not yet, but hope. The kind of hope that appears when a locked door begins to move. The kind of hope that appears when forgotten voices start speaking again. And as those voices grew louder, I realized I was approaching the moment where Egypt's mysterious queens would begin reclaiming the stories that history had tried so hard to hide. That faint outline of hope kept pulling me forward. For so long, the story had felt like a journey through shadows. They were returning, slowly, piece by piece. One recovered inscription might seem insignificant at first glance, a fragment of stone, a damaged name, a few surviving symbols. But together, these fragments formed something powerful, a voice. The more evidence emerged, the clearer it became that many of Egypt's queens had played far greater roles than older histories often suggested. Women who had once been dismissed as ceremonial figures appeared increasingly influential. Some acted as diplomats, some helped secure royal succession, some managed vast political networks. Others stood at the center of religious transformations that reshaped entire generations, and some ruled, not from behind the throne, but on it. The realization changed the way I viewed ancient Egypt. For years, I had imagined its history as a procession of kings whose names filled monuments and textbooks. Now I saw something more complex. The story had never belonged to kings alone. It belonged to queens as well. Queens who navigated dangerous courts, queens who survived political rivalries, queens who made decisions affecting millions of lives, queens whose achievements endured long after attempts were made to erase them. I found myself returning often to Hatshepsut. The more I learned, the more extraordinary her story appeared. Despite efforts to damage her legacy, enormous portions of her accomplishments survived. Her monuments still stand. Her achievements are still studied. Her reign remains one of the most successful periods in Egyptian history. The people who attempted to remove her from memory ultimately failed. Thousands of years later, her name is spoken once again. There was something profoundly moving about that. Imagine dedicating your life to building a legacy. Imagine watching your kingdom prosper. Imagine creating monuments intended to outlive generations. Then imagine someone trying to erase everything. And yet, despite those efforts, your story survives. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough for future generations to rediscover who you were. Enough for history to remember. That same feeling emerged whenever I thought about Nefertiti. Even today, mysteries surround her fate. Questions remain unanswered. Debates continue among scholars. Yet perhaps that uncertainty is part of her power. She reminds me that history is not a finished book. It is an ongoing investigation. Every generation inherits questions from the generations before it. Some questions find answers. Others remain waiting. And somewhere beneath Egypt's sands, there may still be discoveries capable of transforming everything we think we know. That possibility fills me with awe. Because even after centuries of research, ancient Egypt continues to surprise us. Its monuments still rise above the desert horizon. Its tombs still guard secrets. Its mysteries still challenge assumptions. And among those mysteries stand the queens, not as footnotes, not as supporting characters, but as central figures in one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Looking back on this journey, I realized the story was never simply about missing names or damaged statues. It was about memory, who gets remembered, who gets forgotten, and how fragile history can be. A single act of destruction can remove an inscription, a political rival can rewrite a record, a dynasty can attempt to reshape the past. Yet truth has a remarkable resilience. Fragments survive, evidence endures, questions persist, and eventually someone begins searching again. That is exactly what happened with Egypt's mysterious queens. For centuries, parts of their stories remained hidden beneath layers of time. Some were obscured by politics, some were lost through accident, some were deliberately targeted by those who came later. Yet they never vanished completely. The desert kept their secrets, but it also preserved them. And because of that, their voices continue to reach us across thousands of years. When I think of ancient Egypt now, I no longer see only pyramids, temples, and pharaohs. And I see determined women standing within one of history's most powerful kingdoms. I see courage in uncertain times. I see ambition confronting tradition. I see resilience surviving attempts at erasure. Most of all, I see a reminder that history is rarely as simple as it first appears. Behind every monument lies another story. Behind every mystery lies another question. And sometimes, the stories closest to being forgotten become the ones most worth telling. As the sun sets over the Nile and the desert shadows stretch across the ancient stones, I find myself thinking about those queens one final time. Their kingdoms are gone. Their palaces have faded. Their worlds belong to the distant past, yet their presence remains in carved hieroglyphs, in weathered temples, in fragments patiently waiting to be understood, and in the enduring mysteries that continue to inspire wonder thousands of years later. The people who tried to erase them could not silence them forever, because history, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of speaking again. And when it does, the voices that emerge from the sands of ancient Egypt are among the most fascinating the world has ever heard.